That night backstage at The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson said something wrong. And John Wayne's stare silenced him completely. It was March 1976. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank, California. The show had wrapped for the evening. The audience had filed out. The cameras were off. The stage lights were dimming. Just another successful Tuesday night broadcast. Johnny Carson was walking down the backstage corridor toward his dressing room, still wearing his suit and tie, loosening his collar after 90 minutes of performance. Ed McMahon had already left. Doc Severinsen was packing up his trumpet. The crew was breaking down equipment with practiced efficiency. Johnny passed the green room and heard voices inside. He recognized one immediately, that distinctive drawl, deep and unmistakable. John Wayne. The Duke. American icon. The man had been tonight's guest, promoting his latest Western film. The interview had gone well. Wayne had been charming, told a few good stories, made the audience laugh. Johnny stuck his head into the green room. Wayne was sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, still in his interview clothes, boots, jeans, that leather jacket that looked like it had seen 1,000 film sets. A young production assistant was helping him gather his things. "Duke," Johnny said, his trademark grin in place. "Great show tonight. You're always good television." Wayne looked up, nodded. "Thanks for having me, Johnny." "Listen," Johnny said, stepping into the room, his tone shifting to that casual, off-camera familiarity he used with guests he knew well. "I wanted to ask you something. Off the record." Wayne gestured to the chair across from him. The production assistant quietly excused herself, sensing this was a private conversation. The door closed softly behind her. Johnny sat down, leaning back in that relaxed posture he'd perfected over years of late-night conversations. "I've been thinking about doing a bit. You know, for the monologue. About all these war films coming out. Vietnam movies. The whole changing attitude about military service. Patriotism. I was thinking of making a joke about." He said the joke. Exactly what it was doesn't matter now. What matters is that it was flip. Dismissive. The kind of sardonic humor Johnny had built his career on, taking sacred cows and gently puncturing them for laughs. It was about soldiers. About war. About sacrifice. And it was funny in that sharp, cynical way that played well to a studio audience but probably shouldn't have been said in a quiet room to a man who had spent decades embodying American military heroism on screen. Johnny finished the joke. Waited for Wayne's reaction. Maybe a chuckle. Maybe some notes on how to sharpen the punchline. John Wayne didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. He looked at Johnny Carson with an expression that could freeze the Colorado River. That night backstage at The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson said the wrong thing and John Wayne's look completely silenced him. Johnny's smile faltered. He'd seen that look before. In Wayne's movies, in the moments before the Duke's character would deliver some devastating moral truth to a character who needed to hear it. "Johnny," Wayne said, his voice low and steady, "I'm going to say something to you. And I need you to listen." Johnny Carson, who had interviewed presidents and movie stars and the most powerful people in the world, who never lost control of a conversation, who always had the last word, suddenly found himself very quiet. "I know you're a funny man," Wayne continued. "I know your job is to make people laugh. And you're damn good at it. But there are some things you don't joke about. Not because they're off-limits, but because you don't understand them well enough to earn the right." Johnny started to speak. "Duke, I didn't mean..." Wayne held up one hand. Not aggressively. Not angrily. Just firmly. The same gesture he'd used in 100 films to stop an argument before it started. "Let me finish," Wayne said. "I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. And I'm going to tell you why. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who John Wayne was in 1976. He wasn't just a movie star. He was 70 years old. He'd made over 170 films. He'd survived cancer twice. He'd become a living symbol of a particular kind of American masculinity, tough, principled, unwavering. But what most people didn't know, what Johnny Carson didn't know sitting in that green room, was the weight John Wayne carried. Wayne had never served in World War II. He was 34 when Pearl Harbor was attacked, technically eligible for the draft but granted deferment after deferment because Republic Pictures argued his films were essential for morale. Other actors his age, Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, Henry Fonda, had enlisted. They'd served. They'd earned the uniform. John Wayne had played soldiers in dozens of films. He'd become the face of American military heroism. But he'd never actually been a soldier. And it haunted him for the rest of his life. He compensated by visiting troops, by supporting veterans organizations, by using his platform to honor military service in every way he could. But the guilt remained, a constant, quiet companion that reminded him he'd played heroes while real heroes had fought and bled and died. In 1966, Wayne had directed and starred in The Green Berets, a controversial Vietnam War film that many critics hated but that Wayne had made because he believed the soldiers deserved support, even if people disagreed with the war. He'd spent his own money on it. He'd risked his reputation. Not because he loved war, but because he felt he owed something to the men who actually served. And now, in 1976, with Vietnam over and the country still processing the trauma, with soldiers coming home to protests instead of parades, Johnny Carson, sitting in a comfortable green room after a successful television show, was making jokes about military service. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. You want to know why I'm disappointed? Wayne said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made Johnny straighten in his chair. It's because you're better than that joke. You're smarter than that. And the soldiers who might hear it deserve better. Duke, it's just comedy, Johnny said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I make jokes about everything. Politicians, celebrities, current events. That's the job. I know it's your job, Wayne replied. And I'm not telling you what you can or can't say on your show. That's your business. But I am telling you this, when you make jokes about soldiers, about men who went to war because their country asked them to, who came home broken or didn't come home at all, you're not just making fun of a policy or a politician. You're making fun of sacrifice you've never been asked to make. Johnny felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Shame. Real shame. Not the performative kind he occasionally used in his comedy, but genuine discomfort. I've spent my whole career playing soldiers, Wayne continued. Heroes. Warriors. And you know what the worst part is? I was never actually one. When the real soldiers were fighting in World War II, I was on sound stages pretending. I've carried that my whole life. So when I see someone who's also never served making light of it for laughs, it bothers me. The room was completely silent. Somewhere down the hall, a crew member laughed at something. A door closed. The normal sounds of a television studio winding down for the night. But in that green room, time had stopped. I met a kid in 1971, Wayne said, his voice softening slightly. A Marine. Lost both his legs in Kisan. 23 years old. I visited the VA hospital where he was recovering. You know what he told me? He said he used to watch your show. Said you made him laugh when he was deployed. Helped him remember what he was fighting for, normal life, sitting on a couch, watching TV, laughing at stupid jokes. Wayne leaned forward, his eyes locked on Johnny's. That kid is probably still watching your show. Still trying to rebuild his life. And if you make that joke you just told me, he's going to hear it. And he's going to wonder if the guy who used to make him laugh actually understands what he lost. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny Carson sat very still. His hands, which normally gestured constantly during conversation, were folded in his lap. His face, usually animated, always ready with a quip, was motionless. "You're right," Johnny said quietly. "I didn't think about it that way." "Most people don't," Wayne said. "That's not a criticism. It's just a fact. People who haven't been to war don't understand what it costs. Hell, I haven't been to war and I don't really understand it. But I've met enough men who have to know I don't have the right to make it a punchline." Johnny looked down at his hands. "I served in the Navy," he said, almost defensively. "During World War II. I was." "You were stateside," Wayne interrupted gently. "Doing training films and entertainment programs." "I know. I'm not criticizing that. Somebody had to do that work too. But you weren't in combat. Neither of us were. And that matters." The silence stretched again. Finally, Johnny looked up. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't want you to do anything," Wayne said. "I'm not your boss. I'm not your conscience. I'm just a guy who's spent 50 years pretending to be brave and who's learned to respect the people who actually were. If you want to make that joke on your show, that's your call. But I needed you to hear why it bothers me. Because I respect you, Johnny. I think you're one of the smartest men in television. And smart men should think before they make sacrifices into punchlines." Wayne stood up. The conversation was over. He extended his hand. Johnny stood too, taking Wayne's hand. The handshake was firm, sincere. "I won't make the joke," Johnny said. Wayne nodded. "That's your decision. But if you do decide to talk about military service, about veterans, about war, talk to some veterans first. Real ones. The ones who were there. They'll give you material that's actually earned. And it'll be funnier because it'll be true." He picked up his jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at Johnny one more time. "You know what's funny?" Wayne said, a slight smile finally appearing on his weathered face. "The things soldiers actually joke about. The gallows humor they use to survive. That's comedy gold. But it only works when it comes from them. When someone who hasn't been there tries to do it, it just sounds hollow." He tipped his head slightly, not quite a nod, not quite a goodbye, and walked out. Johnny stood alone in the green room for a long time. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. The next night, Johnny Carson did his monologue as usual. There was no joke about soldiers. No cynical take on military service. Instead, there was a brief moment, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, where Johnny mentioned seeing a news report about a veterans hospital. "You know," he said to the camera, his tone unusually serious. "We ask these kids to go fight our wars, and then we act surprised when they come home changed. Maybe instead of jokes, we owe them something else." Just a thought. The audience applauded. It wasn't a big moment. It didn't make headlines. But backstage, the crew members who'd heard about the conversation with John Wayne understood what it meant. Johnny never made that joke. Not that week. Not ever. 3 years later, in 1979, John Wayne died. Stomach cancer. He was 72 years old. Johnny Carson devoted an entire segment of The Tonight Show to honoring him. But he didn't just show film clips or tell Hollywood stories. He talked about the backstage conversation. About being corrected. About learning that some things matter more than the laugh. "Duke taught me something that night," Johnny told his audience, his voice steady but emotional. "He taught me that comedy has limits, not because certain topics are forbidden, but because some sacrifices are too real to trivialize." The camera pushed in close on Johnny's face. If you're watching tonight and you've served this country, if you've worn the uniform, if you've lost someone who did, I want you to know that conversation changed me. And I'm grateful for it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After Wayne's death, Johnny kept a photograph in his desk drawer. Not a publicity still. A candid shot from that night in 1976. Someone had snapped it in the backstage corridor. Wayne walking away. Johnny standing in the green room doorway, watching him go. The photo stayed there until Johnny's final show in 1992. It reminded him that sometimes the most important lessons don't come from the audience. They come from the people brave enough to tell you when you're wrong.